From the Oklahoman newsroom, it is time for the Red Zone, our extended weekly look at Oklahoma football. I'm Jenny Carlson here with fellow columnist Barry Trammell and OU beat writer Ryan Aber. Guys, we're extended looking at spring football. It starts this week, and a lot to talk about after Lincoln Riley addressed the media on Wednesday. We got a chance to hear about some position changes, some injuries, but first and foremost, Ryan, was the defense. We obviously know Alex Grinch is in, changing things up. What struck you most about what Lincoln Riley had to say about defensive changes heading into the spring?
Well, I think one thing, his acknowledgement that they had to be much better really fast, and that's not talking about in September when they start the season. It's talking about this week when they hit the field, that he needs to see that improvement pretty quickly. The talk from Lincoln Riley about changing body styles with some of these guys to match what Alex Grinch wants to do defensively, I thought was interesting. A lot of guys having to drop weight, not significant weight, 5, 10, 15 pounds to fit in with what they want to do. And also some of those position change announcements. Yeah. Well, one position change announcement in general, Michael Thompson, I thought maybe that had to do with that philosophy of wanting faster defenders on the field. They feel like Michael Thompson might be better suited to the offensive line.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about those position changes because there was about half a dozen guys or so, it seemed like.
Two big ones.
Yeah, and we'll get to that in a second. But Barry, as it relates to the defense, I think you asked the question, what are we supposed to call this? Because, we haven't really heard that it's going to be, significant in alignment change. Maybe that is part of it, but Lincoln Riley eventually came around to Speed D, which hits on a lot of what Ryan's talking about. Are you going with Speed D at this point for the Oklahoma defense?
Well, I'll call it whatever they want to, but I really was just wanting to know how you're going to line up. And the answer is he's not going to tell us. I asked him walking off on the way to the elevator. I said, I don't even know if you're lining up 3-4 or 4-3. How are you lining up? And he said, we're going to be multiple, which is the international order of...
we don't know.
Yeah, we know, we're not going to tell you. So, I think it's possible it's still to be determined. It's most definitely to be unveiled. We'll probably see for sure when they play the University of Houston. Yeah. But it all intrigues me because we all said, and Lincoln admits it, he sort of admitted it on Wednesday, this team needed a total makeover. It needed a new attitude. It needed new structure, new scheme, new everything. So maybe it needed a new alignment. Now, the truth is, I tend to think they probably got more linebacker types than lineman types that they really like. Ryan wrote today about, they really need to get their best 11 on the field. So if that's the case, it's probably going to be more of a 3-4 than a 4-3, but it's also possible they still don't know.
Well, I actually think it's going to be, you're probably going to see more of a four-man front look from
really.
Even though, like you said, I think they have more linebackers that they would feel good about right now than defensive linemen, but I think ultimately they would like to be in a 4-3. Now, that fourth can be that hybrid defensive end linebacker spot that we've seen so much over the last few years.
Let me ask you, Ronnie Perkins. Is he a hybrid, or is he one of the mainstays on the line?
Well, I think he sort of fits into that hybrid spot. He's much more of a defensive end, though, and I think we'll see him on the end in all looks, but especially in that four-man look.
Well, it seems like, and Ryan, in writing about the linebackers, I was reminded that was the group that really in the last few years has probably become the most. Maybe not talked about because the cornerbacks and the defensive secondary, that's you're so under fire in the Big 12. But linebackers, that group was so important in the Stoops defenses. The position of Kalmus and Lehman and Marshall and all those guys, and you just didn't see the playmaking all the time out of those guys. We may not have an indication yet, but what's your expectation of what's going to be needed from those guys moving forward?
Well, one, they're going to have to have speed. They're going to have to be able to read what's happening really quickly because in that single gap defensive alignment that they want to do, those linebackers are going to have to read where they need to be and make sure that they're able to cover some of those gaps. So I think a guy like Caleb Kelly becomes really important in this defense because of those things. I think Kenneth Murray's place is going to be a little bit magnified, whether he stays where he's been right there in the middle, or if he shifts to a more natural position outside for him. So that's going to be something that's really interesting to watch. Not sure how much of an answer we're going to get for that this spring as they try to sort of, shroud what they're doing a little bit. But that's going to be a really critical spot for the Sooners defense.
Barry, as you talk about alignment, as Ryan's talking about linebackers, I'm reminded that secondary is the group that, when it comes to defending in the Big 12, we saw so many issues over the last several years. If you're Alex Grinch, what do you want to see out of those guys, as this spring goes along? What do you want to get to the end of spring and say, here's where we are in the secondary?
Well, I think they want to get better at safety. I actually think the Sooners are okay at corner. Those guys get burned, but listen, that's what happens. That's playing cornerback in the Big 12 is like defending centers in the NBA Northwest Division. When you're guarding Karl Anthony Towns, guess what? You're going to get scored on.
Yeah.
When you're playing cornerback in the Big 12, guess what? You're going to get thrown on.
Yeah.
So just the way it is. The safeties weren't great down last year, I didn't think.
Which is why I think that there's a good chance Trey Norwood sticks at safety.
So, to me, that's the key. Find some safeties. We talked about Brendan Radley-Hiles. Jordan Parker's another converted cornerback. Robert Barnes has been hurt. So they got a lot of different parts there. So find those guys. They're actually not in bad shape with Trey Brown and Parnell Motley at corner. So we'll see how it goes. The best way to help the corners is help them up front.
Yeah.
Get some pass rush, especially without blitzing. Ryan talked about maybe 4-3 is the base. The best defense in football is a 4-3 defense where you don't have to blitz to rush the quarterback. If you do that, you're going to be fine on defense. Sooners haven't been able to do that. Most teams aren't. But if they could get to that point, that secondary is going to look a lot better.
Ryan, as Lincoln Riley pointed out yesterday, when it comes to figuring out this defense, you're dealing with position changes, which I want to talk about here, but you're also dealing with some injuries, some guys that you're not going to be playing with. So it's a little bit of a tricky time to say, we need to get to the end of the spring and be at this point or have this metric achieved. So let's talk about those position changes and the injuries that are going to keep guys out. How's that going to affect primarily on the defensive side? I know there's some changes offensively too, but what about the defensive side of the ball?
Well, when you talk about the defensive side, the two injuries that really stood out to me was Jordan Parker and Robert Barnes. Barry mentioned those guys as possibly being keys in that secondary. Both of those guys out for the spring. I think that's going to really make it much more difficult for them to find roles in this defensive secondary, especially with, like I said, Trey Norwood shifting to safety at the end of last year. Probably gives them a little bit better feeling for him at that spot. And then, when you look on the offensive side, I think Creed Humphrey being gone, I think it's going to be something that is pretty critical for this offensive line, an offensive line that lost 4 starters to the NFL draft. Creed Humphrey's the only guy returning. You don't have a natural center left on the roster. I think ultimately EJ and Doma Ogar from Allen, Texas is probably going to be the backup when all's said and done, but he's not here for spring, so you're going to have to shift somebody. Could we see like Michael Thompson, the converted defensive lineman, play there? I think that's going to be really interesting to watch. Probably, for me, one of the top storylines on the offensive side this spring.
Well, and losing, Barry, so many offensive linemen, I think the expectation is Bill Bedenbaugh will just rebuild that, but at the same time, you take your most experienced guy, your center, out of the mix, you're not going to have you're losing some time in the spring. There's no two ways around that.
Yeah, Lincoln said something odd yesterday. He said, we actually think this will help us that Creed Humphreys will miss the spring.
There's zero chance.
Here's the deal. This idea, and I heard somebody on the radio inside the program just on the way to work today said, this may be the most talented collection of offensive linemen they've had, which I wanted to say, you just lost 4 guys going to the NFL, 2 high draft picks. So let's temper all that enthusiasm. The Sooners are going to take a major step back on the offensive line. They just are. So no reason to pretend they're not. So it's going to be a work in progress. I think they're going to be fine in the line. Nobody's ever sat around thinking, oh, you can't block. That's not been the problem. It won't be the problem this year, but no way will they approach these 4 guys that have left. Creed Humphreys is going to be the bell cow of that line. I think he's not going to be around this spring. That's too bad. He would really help them with just development.
You know, as we talk about position changes, as we talk about offensive line, clearly the one position that we haven't talked about in new guys is quarterback. Obviously, Sooners losing Kyler Murray, a guy that's now being talked about as the number 1 overall pick in the draft. Ryan, Jalen Hurts comes in. Everybody assumes it's Jalen Hurts' job. But
because it is Jalen Hurts' job,
but
no matter what Lincoln Riley wants to say.
Well, on Wednesday, he was asked about Tanner Mordecai and the battle, and I'm going to put that into air quotes because we've seen this play out before. Baker Mayfield wasn't named the starter until well into practice in the fall. Kyler Murray was even later in the fall before he's named. Is this just what a coach has to do to keep quarterback depth? I mean, to think that anybody is approaching Jalen Hurts, 26-2 as a starter at Alabama, I mean, it seems crazy.
Yeah, Jalen Hurts is going to be the starter when they start the season against Houston. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But yes, Lincoln Riley has to do this. You know, he did it last year with Austin Kendall, wanted to keep Austin Kendall engaged, and by all accounts, Austin Kendall did stay engaged and really fought as best he could, although I think all of us expected Kyler Murray ultimately to be named a starter, and that's what happened, and Kyler Murray went on and won the Heisman, and Austin Kendall wound up transferring to West Virginia. He's got to do that with Tanner Mordecai, especially when you look at their quarterback depth right now, because behind Jalen Hurts, he's it right now, Tanner Mordecai. Without Spencer Rattler on campus, obviously they think that Spencer Rattler is going to be their quarterback of the future. Next year there will be a battle between Mordecai, presumably, and Spencer Rattler. But, Lincoln Riley has to do this internally, and if he's going to do it internally, he's got to, tell us that there's a battle going on.
Yeah.
And that's what he's done. But Jalen Hurts, barring injury, will start against Houston.
I thought it sort of funny yesterday, and I'm not really ripping Lincoln. I love Lincoln Riley. I'd give him one of my kidneys. But he stands up there 6 months ago, literally 6 months ago, and says it's a battle with Austin Kendall and Kyler Murray. It's tight, it's tight, it's tight. 6 months later, he's all over Charlie Casserly of the NFL Network for suggesting that Kyler Murray should be the overall number 1 pick in the draft. So it's a little bit of a wide disparity in reality here in terms of, the quality of a quarterback you got and the level of the competition. Can't be both. He can't be the overall number 1 pick in the draft quality and also be in a tight race with a guy who's literally never played. And now we're hearing the same thing about Jalen. He's got to say it. Ryan's right. He's got to say it, but it's not reality.
But also, I think, we talk about what he's got to do internally. What he's doing with Kyler Murray is what he needs to do recruiting-wise.
Oh, yeah, it's self-serving. Yeah, self-serving.
Yeah, he's pushing the right buttons. Just when you look at them side by side, obviously, it's a little incongruent.
No doubt about it.
All right, well, spring gets underway for the Sooners on Thursday. We'll have ongoing coverage as we head towards the spring game. Lots to do before then, so be sure to stay with the best coverage team anywhere at newsok.com and every day in the Oklahoman.